All right, good afternoon, everybody. We thank you for joining the webinar. We will begin in just a moment. Before we do that, we would like to quickly go over webinar procedures today. As always, the audio is one way from us to you. You do not need a microphone. You can send us your questions and comments, of course, throughout the course of this webinar to the Q&A feature, and we encourage you to use that Q&A feature. You'll find that on your Zoom toolbar, and I would like to bring your attention to that now and have you help us with a quick audio test. I'd just like you to type a Y or yes into that Q&A box to let us know if indeed our signal's reaching you and it's a good, clear signal. While we wait for some of those confirmations to come in, and there they are. So everything looks good. So anyway, without further ado, then let's go ahead and get this webinar started.
Well, thank you, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marie Sullivan. I'm the Washington State PTA Legislative Consultant, and I'm so pleased you could take time out of your Monday, August 10th to join us. We again have three very distinguished panelists that are going to talk with us for the next hour or so. We have a lot of questions that came in ahead of time, and so we will keep an eye on the Q&A for additional questions. But I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves very quickly, and then we'll get right into questions. So, Chris, maybe we can start with you and then go to Lacy and Maddy.
Great. Greetings, everybody. It's good to see you again. It's been awesome to be on these with Washington State PTA. I'm Chris Reykdal, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and looking forward to a great hour.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lacy Fehrenbach. I'm the Deputy Secretary for COVID response at the Washington State Department of Health, and glad to be with you here today. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Maddy Thompson here. I'm Governor Inslee's Policy Advisor for Education.
Great. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to all the PTA members out there joining. So we're just going to dive right in. We've got a couple of questions for Lacy and Maddy to start off. So big announcement last week, and Lacy, I'm wondering if you and Maddy can kind of tag team here. Please explain the details about schools reopening in the fall. Now we've got the high, moderate, and low risk categories. How's that all going to work, and what should parents know?
Maddy, I can't hear you.
Sorry. How about I start with a bit of the context, and then you can go more into details about the different categories. So, it came to our attention that there needed to, as school districts made decisions around their fall opening plan, and as local health jurisdictions were striving to advise them, that it would be helpful to support them in that work by having agreed upon metrics that the Department of Health worked with the local health jurisdictions to develop. And that would help the local health jurisdictions all be on the same page in terms of advising school district superintendents. So that's what led to the health metrics that came out last week. If you need a copy of that, please let us know, and I'll be happy to put a link to it. It's on the Department of Health website. There's a preamble that I think is worth reading, and on the very last page, there's a decision tree that helps school district leaders work with their communities, and then also local health jurisdictions to go through the process of what questions should they be answering to help them determine the best mode of learning. Now, I just wanted to add that this is something that may be updated. So as we see what's happening with the schools, and we see, different rates of infection or different outbreaks, this is something Department of Health may need to update. But a lot of schools have already made their fall plan decisions. Some have yet to make those decisions, so this will help them. It will also help them when they decide to reevaluate, whether that's in 6 weeks or 2 months, whenever it is that they decide to reevaluate their educational mode. So I hand it over to Lacy now.
Well, and Lacy and Maddy, let me just say, I do have that matrix. So if you feel that it would be useful for me to screen share, just give me the word, because I've got that decision tree that I can pop up.
Sure. Feel free to put it up. What I can share is a little bit of additional background. To help shape this matrix and help inform decision making, we looked at various countries that had reopened and were able to manage their cases without having a lot of outbreaks that closed their schools or a big increase in the disease rate in the community around them. And we found three common features. One, these countries had a downward trend of disease. So on their epi curve, you're all getting familiar with that, they were on the downward slope, so decreasing cases overall. And they had low amounts of community spread. And this is measured by prevalence of COVID in the community. And one of the measures we use in Washington State, and many jurisdictions use this, are the number of cases based on your population size, so per 100,000 over a 2-week period. And these countries typically had below 25 cases per 100,000 over 14 days. And then the third feature is that they took a cautious approach. Most of them brought back only some of their students, not all, and which groups they prioritized varied by the country. A lot of them brought back young students. Some of them brought back students that had special needs or students whose parents or caregivers were essential workers. But they only brought back some initially, not all. And then the second part of that cautious approach is they had pretty rigorous health and safety measures. So for us, we had put out the guidance around health and safety measures that mirrored what many other countries took in terms of layered approaches, wearing masks, symptom screening, physical distancing, increased cleaning and ventilation, as well as really good hand hygiene. But what we didn't really have for our local decision makers was a framework to assess if they have low rates of COVID in their community and what their disease trends look like as part of school decision making. And so I think she has pulled it up here. We put together, with input from health officers across the state, a framework that really asks communities to look at their case counts per 100,000 over 14 days as a leading measure, but not the sole measure for making these decisions. We also, and there are 3 levels in that regard. High is if you have more than 75 cases per 100,000 over 14 days. Moderate is 25 to 75, and then low is under 25. And also for a similar benchmark, that under 25 cases per 100,000 is also one of the performance measures we use in the county Safe Start reopening. So before counties can move from one phase to the next, they have to be containing the disease enough to be at about that level of transmission. The other, I said it's one of a few measures that we ask them to look at. So it is the leading measure, but we're also asking them to look at, are your case counts going up or down? So like if you're on the border and you're in the moderate, but you're near the high and your case counts are going up, that would probably suggest you need to take a more cautious approach, potentially. And then we also encourage them to look at their hospitalizations because that's a measure of how well your community is responding and able to respond, and their test positivity. So this is the percent positive COVID tests of all the tests that are done in your county. And really we want that metric to be at or below 5%. That tells you you're doing enough testing to actually know how much COVID is in your community. And then, of course, we want the local decision makers, health and education, to be thinking about the other health and education risks and benefits that come with being in person or being remote, and really making decisions about that based on the values and capacities within their communities. And so, the health officer at the local level can make a recommendation on the health aspects. It is ultimately up to the local school administrator to decide how or when to open schools. We also have guidance, and these are in the second and third columns on this decision tree, that look at the other aspects of reopening schools. So if you're doing any in-person learning or in-person anything at the school, so even if it's just the teachers coming and the staff coming to the school in order to teach out to students who are remote, you have to have all of the DOH health and safety measures in place. And so those are listed there. Like, do you have a plan for your at-risk students and staff? Do you have the ability to transport or facilitate drop-off and pickup of students that fits the guidance? Can you cohort or group students to reduce risk of transmission? Are you ready to do the 6 feet of physical distancing? Do you have a way to promote frequent hand washing or sanitizing? Can you encourage face covering use among your students and staff? And then how will you increase your cleaning and disinfection as well as improve your ventilation? You have to be able to do all of those things. And then the last column is really, are you ready to respond to cases or outbreaks in your school if they happen? And there are questions here, and they sort of delineate, is school or local public health the lead for this? You know, can the school ensure symptom monitoring? So this is checking each day, whether that's through parent attestation or screening at entry for symptoms of COVID. Are you prepared to manage students or staff who become ill while they're there? Are you ready to communicate to your families if you have cases or outbreaks in your school? And then for local public health, do they have the testing capacity they need to support a possible uptick in cases? And do they have adequate staff to do the contact tracing in partnership with the school and also respond to outbreaks if there's an outbreak? And then are they going to be ready, and I hope the answer to this is yes, but to continuously monitor the community level of COVID so that if we need to change course, we can do that. So that is essentially a high-level overview of the tools that we put out for local decision makers. And they've been out for, I guess, about 6 days now. So hopefully people are finding them useful. I do want to reiterate Maddy's point, even if your school has already made decisions about how they're going to start the year, this for us is also a pathway to see how you expand access to in-person learning for those who have made the choice to start primarily remote. And it also sets forth sort of the path for how you would make decisions about closures if disease burden increases in your community.
Thanks, Lacy. And you covered a lot of our questions that we had around this health piece, but let me throw a couple back. So what happens, I think there's a lot of concern about what happens if one student tests positive or 2 students test positive, or you have a teacher that tests positive in that school. Does the entire school need to shut down right away? Or what's the thinking? What are the protocols there?
Sure, just give me 1 second to hide this screen. So there are protocols, and these are in the health and safety guidance. So typically when only 1 student tests positive or staff member, what will happen is hopefully that person is at home isolating and being well taken care of by their primary care provider. In that case, what typically happens is local public health, when that positive result comes in, will be notified and would contact the school. It can also work the other way around potentially. So a parent could tell the school, my child's staying home today, we just found out, they have COVID, and the school will contact local public health. Either way, what is going to happen is local public health and the school are going to work together to identify close contacts of the person in the school building. Local public health will also talk to that person about their close contacts in other settings, but I'm just going to focus on the school piece here. So, they are going to be asking the school, look at the seating charts and tell me where Lacy sat and who was near her, who was, and from there, they will public health will reach out to those close contacts and encourage them also to quarantine at home, and also encourage them to get tested to see if they have COVID. And the school will, maintaining confidentiality of the individual, should inform parents in that class potentially, maybe in the whole school, depending on what type of school it is, that there has been a case. When we start seeing multiple cases, that's when we might send a class, if you're doing strict cohorting, into quarantine. So you would say the whole class needs to go home. Or if there's enough close contacts or multiple cases and thresholds, then we might say the whole school needs to close for a period of time to complete the investigation and break the chains of transmission. But generally for a single case, we're really recommending that the school clean, work with local public health on the case investigation and contact tracing to minimize the disruption within the school environment.
Thank you. So a couple of questions that popped up, and thank you, Maddy. I see you've put the, looks like the link in the Q&A, so thank you. So Lacy, when you say at entry, so when students are entering a building, does the health screening, can it be after the student enters the building, or does it need to be done beforehand?
Schools have flexibility to do this in a variety of ways. It can be done by parent attestation, so they fill out a form or something online before the child even leaves in the morning. It can be done before a child gets on the bus. It can be done at the front doors of the school. It could be done in the homeroom class. We do encourage it to be early in the day if possible, because the goal here is to find students and staff, the staff also need to be screened, who have symptoms and exclude them from school, so that again, we're trying to break chains of transmission here, or potential chains of transmission.
Great. Do you have any data on the rates of infection in current childcare settings? So what are we seeing out there with some of our youngest learners?
Sure. We do have some data in Washington State on the number of outbreaks in childcare settings. And I think we're reporting right now around 30 in Washington State. And those, I want to be clear, those are over the course of the pandemic. They're not all happening right now. And I also want to make sure people understand, outbreak sounds like a very scary word, and it can be, but an outbreak is defined as 2 or more cases of COVID with probable epidemiologic link. So many of these outbreaks in childcare are very small numbers, and we generally see that they tend to be not exclusively among staff, but about 2/3 roughly of the cases are among staff and 1/3 children.
Great. And then this might be a question back to Maddy or even to Chris, but how are schools planning to show they can comply with the measurements? So not just with the new guidance or the new recommendations that have come out, but your layering requirements. Will there be on-site assessments? Is anybody going to be out there checking schools? How do you check the progress?
Yeah, this is Chris. I'll only start it with, we've got a process here where every school district through board action will submit the reopening plan, and they have to do a formal attestation, superintendent board, that they can meet the criteria on all of those. We do not have armies of health auditors. That wouldn't be our role anyways, but boy, they do have to have that plan, particularly that 6-foot physical distancing as a standard sort of measure of practice. And, you know, that's obviously something somebody could come in and affirm that, you know, in this classroom, it's only 15 desks and they better only see 15 desks. But really, other than that, you know, hand hygiene, screening, cleaning, there aren't folks who are going to be auditing the work. Most districts that we've observed who are going to attempt to open in some form, they have a, you know, pretty rigorous process that they're thinking through right now on that screening process, though. So, for example, if it's an at-home attestation and 10% of students are coming in each day without that attestation, they've got a plan in place right there to, you know, screen those 10% of students. So each district's going to figure it out. Marie's always tired of me saying these words, but there is a balance between this like state guidance and the local actual deployment, and that's very much on the ground.
Maddy, did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay. Then I guess kind of one final question, and I think others might pop up, but for our health duo here. So you mentioned that the school district basically gets to make the decision, but I think we heard from the governor that the local public health department also has the ability to shut down a school if it feels that it's needed. So can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Sure. So both of those things are true. I realize it is slightly confusing, but a health officer, and this is outside of COVID, this is period, as part of their authority, has the ability to prevent the opening of or close down a school if they view that there is a significant health risk. And so if, and that could be a school wants to open and the health officer does not believe they are ready, or it could be also a school is open and disease burden in the community is increasing, or there are outbreaks in the school, and so the health officer decides to close the school or switch it to remote learning due to transmission. And there's the actual administrative code that gives the health officer this authority is linked to in the decision tree document as well. For people, for the policy nerds that want to know that stuff.
Okay, thank you. So kind of this is back to, oh, and I see Katie Payne has put the link in the Q&A, so hopefully everyone can get it now. I can't see everything out there, so thank you, Katie, appreciate that. So let's move to some of the questions. Oh, yes, Addie. Yeah, go ahead, Maddy.
Important to say is that, we hope this will be a good guide for communities and a goalpost so that people really strive to do the right thing, limit their interactions with others, wear masks, wash their hands, only socialize on a very limited basis, outdoors, because that is the way we can reduce the spread of infection. And so if we want to reopen our schools, we really need to work on what we've been asked to do as a community, and that is to do all the health and protocols that we can. So I really hope that people take that to heart and share it with their friends and families as much as possible.
Yeah, I think some of the modeling that came out before that talked about how no school is an island and what happens in the community definitely affects what happens in our schools. So so appreciate that, and thanks again for that reminder. Let's shift to a few other questions about access. So I know this is not going to come as any surprise, but there were a lot of parents who felt kind of abandoned is the word I've seen, but also just totally disconnected with the remote learning experience they had in the spring. And so Chris, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're doing to help districts make this a better experience for families and students. And Maddy, I know you may also have some thoughts about that.
Great. Yeah, last spring, the closure order in March, ultimately within a week or two rippled across really every state in the country. And what we've been trying to observe is, did anyone have this right? Was anyone prepared at scale to make this transition? And no one did, it turns out. There are some school districts who were better prepared. There are certainly some smaller institutions that had the ability to do that. But by and large, what we saw, like in our state, was everyone sort of scrambling to figure out what was next. And if you recall, it seems like an eternity ago, but even 6 months ago, 5 months ago, there were a lot of people saying, hey, we're going to get through this. It'll surge and it'll go away and everything will be fine and we'll reopen schools. And we've obviously learned now that is clearly not the case. So what we have tried to do is build a framework here where districts are not just thinking about this as a temporary environment. Clearly, we want to open school in person. That would be the best thing for kids, but it has to be safe for students and staff. And in most communities, it's not yet. So our guidance in June, and we've continued to tell districts, is you need to be ready for a really successful remote learning experience that is built with a lot of the structures you're used to in traditional school. You need regular schedules for students. They need to know what that schedule is. They need to know when they're in contact and what period or what teacher they're with and when. They need daily attendance. We expect students to engage every day. Teachers need professional learning, and we've gotten to about 5,000, and we're going to be doing a significant more here pretty soon on the learning management platforms. So knowing how to teach online is one thing, and then making sure that everyone's using a common tool. We've got reports of middle and high schoolers in particular who had 5 different teachers, and they all had 5 different communication tools they were using. So you're going to see a huge improvement this year around that stuff. We've built a system, at least a system of guidance, and I believe districts are doing an amazing job now building out something that looks like a more formal remote learning opportunity. It doesn't change the fact that we're 2-dimensional on screens. It doesn't change the fact that some students are going to struggle more. And I think we're going to talk about questions with connectivity and some of the work we've done there. Maybe I'll just lead into it, but the systems are in place now to have this look like, hey, if you were starting a school right now remotely, what would it look like? You'd have standards established, you'd have clear schedules, you'd have clear expectations for learning, you'd be back to evaluation and assessment, you would definitely have a single learning management system, you take regular attendance. That's in place, and virtually none of that was in place a couple months ago. The connectivity is a big one, because we do know there are families that still either don't have connectivity, or even if they do, maybe there are multiple children in the household. So what do you do if both kids are supposed to be in second period or with their 3rd and 4th grade teacher respectively in the house? These are really hard things right now. Districts are trying to find a technology hardware solution for everyone and connectivity. So they're partnering with private providers. Thanks to the hard work of Maddy and the governor's office, OFM, and the legislature, they've now released 2 pots of money for us. $2.5 million to really expand professional learning for teachers and other educators who can work on learning management systems, and then over $8 million to connect families. And what we're going to do is buy broadband or wireless access, starting with free and reduced price lunch families who are in a serviceable area, but they don't currently have the means to make that connection. And we're very close to the RFQ on that, and multiple providers will be eligible. So it's not that you have to live in a particular area. If you have connectivity on that particular provider, whether it's Charter or AT&T or Verizon or Comcast or anybody, if they want to be a part of the program, they can be. And we hope to sign up thousands and thousands of more families over the next 4 to 8 weeks. It'll actually go for a year. So as families sign up, we will pay for their access using federal funds for an entire year. And obviously reevaluate after that. We're going to be pushing on the legislature to make this a part of our permanent culture of connectivity. Every family needs to be connected, and Washington State should lead on that. So there's a couple of things that give me real hope that districts are in a very different position than they were at that sudden closure in March.
Thanks, Chris. Maddy, did you have a follow-up you wanted to share?
Just wanted to share that sometimes people see the school district building itself as unsafe. It's not that the building itself is unsafe. What makes the situation unsafe is when people congregate together and cough on each other and spread droplets. So I just wanted to reinforce that again, that in some few instances, there may be cases for students that absolutely need a service provided at the school with the agreement from the staff who are working at the school with the correct protective equipment for students and staff, that they can actually get some services at school if absolutely needed at all these 3 levels of risk. Clearly, we would hope that people try to pursue, if you're at the highest level of risk or even moderate risk, that you're still trying to pursue avenues where you don't need to bring too many people into the school building. But I just wanted to reinforce it's not the building itself that's dangerous.
Yeah, thank you, Maddy. And Chris and Lacy, you guys are welcome to look at the Q&A too. And if something pops up and you say, oh, I really want to pop in on that. But just to carry, so Chris, the idea about paying for internet is kind of a great thing. But again, that there are people who are in the rural areas that don't have that connection, fiber to home. So what kinds of things are being done for that gap?
Yeah, it's a really powerful question. As part of our expectations and our guidance and what districts are writing their plans to is to really have the ability to connect with every student. So what it can't be remote, and they've started as remote, I go back to Maddy's point, the governor's proclamation for our physical building closure, it expired and it's not been reset, which means our buildings are available right now for teaching and learning. It is not going to happen in most places because local health authorities are in fact working with school districts and they made the decision to start remotely. But it can be the case that if a student cannot connect, or a student has a profound disability or therapy they need that just isn't going to work well at all, even with a better system, even with a real powerful family engagement, maybe they've even re-examined the IEP in the interim, if they absolutely need a service in that building, it's an option. Unlike this spring, the building by proclamation was physically closed, as you remember, with remarkably few exceptions. That's actually now up to local school districts on how they want to deploy their learning model. So we do expect more services for students in the building. Of course, as Lacy would say from public health, this is all about congregate settings, and it is about contact, and it's about time, and it's about protection and all of that. So it can't be that everyone says, I have to go back, because that ruins the whole concept here, and we'll have the cases like we're seeing in parts around the country and Georgia and others. So we're going to trust districts to do what they're legally responsible to do, which is provide basic ed and the actual means, deciding how, right? So we don't say at OSPI, it's this many students or it's this family. That's a local decision, but our buildings are available and our districts are expected to have a learning opportunity for every kid. And if they find out somebody is not connected, they better figure it out, either face-to-face. There may be some districts still rolling packets out this year with their buses. That will be an option for them. But because we're taking, sort of daily engagement, daily attendance, and we're evaluating student learning, and we're grading again, there's a very different expectation this fall.
Lacy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, it's not to this question. It's a different question that popped up in the chat box. So someone asked about other states that have reopened and what we're learning from them. And I think I would say it's probably too soon to tell. The question asker alluded to this. It is only a few districts and states across the country that have opened already this fall. And most of those schools and districts have only been open a week or so. We are watching very closely. We too, like all of you, tend to get the bad news stories first. So the stories where there are outbreaks or closures that have to happen. But I think we do look forward to learning both from schools in Washington State that are able to open because their transmission rates are low, and schools in other parts of the country that do so. And we do update our guidance regularly. And as Maddy alluded to, we are prepared also to update those decision-making tools as well.
Thank you. Hey, Chris, let's go back to the buildings and students, particularly students with IEPs and 504 plans. I think parents are pretty concerned and are confused about whether their students can be back, should be back, how that can be done. Can you talk a little bit more about that, as well as compensatory services?
Yeah, a little bit. Of course, I always encourage you to bring Glenna on because she can certainly go into detail. We've issued a lot of additional guidance around this. Glenna's team leads that work, of course. Some of it is best practices on how to do it, and some of it is additional regulatory expectations for sure. This is always about that personal relationship and that IEP plan and that team locally. So families need to make sure they understand the expectations of the school and the district with respect to their IEP, and then affirmatively check with them. Is that going to happen this year? Is my IEP going to be followed? Am I going to get the services provided, the minutes necessary? Will the resources be there? And it's time to really engage in that question, so that if a family is not comfortable with the answer, that they don't think that's going to be met, then we need to figure out additional accommodations at the local level. Maybe there's an agreement for folks to revisit the IEP to figure out some nuance or some service that can be provided. But right now is the time to call the school district and say, I want to make sure that based on what you're planning for, my student's going to get the services they need? And if not, then this reopen isn't going to work for us, and we need to figure that out. And I'm definitely observing districts who are really intentional in some places about that inclusion. Their reopening plan, their reopening conversations includes parents with, for students with disabilities in a specific understanding of what in our remote schedule is going to work. What kinds of things can we do online that are relatively effective? Reading supports and one-on-one supports can happen. Really intensive therapies, that's not going to happen remotely. And so parents right now can say, I'm going to make sure that given the building can be open, that there's an opportunity for me here. And it's so complex everywhere, of course. And some of you are in districts with huge scale, thousands of students with disabilities, and some of you are in districts with a couple students. And those two outcomes are a very different opportunity here. So know what your district's plan is, know whether you're a high, middle, or low risk county, because that helps districts determine a little bit of what options are available to them, and be super engaged right now with your local district on their plan.
Thanks, Chris. So one of the big things that I'm hearing a lot about from parents is, with so many districts starting in a virtual setting, remote learning, childcare is a huge issue. So whether you do the remote or whether you do the hybrid, childcare, parents have to go back to work in many cases. And so, or as you mentioned, they were juggling multiple kids doing different learning. What do you think, what is happening with childcare, and what is it the PTA maybe could be doing to be helpful on that front?
Yeah, from a guidance standpoint, we've asked districts to play a bigger role in brokering childcare. So they may not be the provider. So if you've got all your teachers engaged and they're full load here working and engaging families and teaching and learning, and you're running food around or even transporting students, and you sort of think about all the supports in a school, there isn't suddenly a giant bit of resource or funding for childcare. And it's probably been the hardest thing about this, without question. We're trying to figure out if other states have figured it out, and they haven't. I think we're all hoping that the feds, through their next stimulus act, are going to try to figure out a way to get some money to states to support this effort. But there's a couple things about that everyone should know. It wouldn't make sense if it's unsafe to bring 20 kids into a classroom to put 20 kids in some childcare center and roll out some laptops and have everyone share those things for learning. It sort of defeats the purpose of making this something we have to address in terms of a public health crisis. That'd be very different, however, if families could get child care vouchers or direct support so that they could at least bring someone in the home, or figure out a safe setting where they think their student can learn. I have no idea whether the feds are going to come through with that. I was really certain a couple weeks ago that deal would come together, and now I'm not so certain. So Maddy may want to weigh in if she's still on, just because I know the governor has just been working incredibly hard trying to solve this. We've got legislators who don't have a financial answer, but they said, just keep giving more guidance. And so what's going to come out from us here pretty soon is a lot more tangible toolkit on how school districts can play the role of connecting child care providers in the community with families that need it, and taking a larger responsibility in that. But unfortunately, no one from either side of the aisle or anywhere in another state has suddenly figured out how to pay for remote instruction and childcare. It certainly reminds all of us just how much this entire economy rests on the success of public education. You cannot deny that it is the most powerful opportunity for equitable learning, and it is also what underwrites the ability for working families to go to work, and that's very challenging right now. So if I have one message more than any is let's get to that place through good public health, wear your face mask, wash your hands, 6 feet of distance, do the right stuff. Let's try to get our schools open. It's the fastest way to help families and community. And let us never abandon the power of public education, because some families might go find their own private solution, but those who cannot, they will need this system in place when we can come back.
Yeah, just to add to that, this is a topic that keeps me up at night. What's a bit different from the spring is that it largely overlapped with the stay home, stay healthy order. So we had, working parents, a lot of them at home. I think it was still an issue for people. It was hard to assess how much of an issue it was, where people were able to find care. And if it's for the short term, that's one thing. But then looking at like 6 weeks of care or 2 months or 3 months, I mean, that's a whole different issue. We haven't found a silver bullet yet. We haven't found that perfect solution. Still collecting data on what we expect the gap might be, but I'm particularly worried about single parent households, households where parents are expected back to work, and they have young children. So we're looking at ways to prioritize anything that we can. If we have some ways to prioritize funding towards, you know, low income families and, yeah, you know, the younger children who need the care. But let us know if you have any ideas. So thank you very much.
Will do. And I know you have to leave us here, I think, right around now, Maddy, but thank you for joining us and appreciate, hopefully we'll get another one of these scheduled soon too, and would love to have you back. Chris, I think this is a question back for you is, you talked a little bit about professional development for teachers. I've also heard some interest in being able to train families on the different learning platforms. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so the federal CARES Act funds we're using for the professional learning is available for that as well. And the way we're doing this is we rarely deliver any direct teacher professional learning out of OSPI. We've got partners. So our 9 regional educational service districts will receive these funds. They are building those programs right now. And at least in their initial concept of this, they had components of this. And again, maybe we'll bring Jessica on sometime from AESD, but they were building components where parents could take classes too, so they could learn the tools. Hey, what is Google Classroom? How can I optimize it? And where do I go if teachers record? And where are the live sessions? And how do we submit assignments? And so that was part of their plan. They wrote a formal request to us, and we've embraced that, and that's why they're getting the money. But we got to get Jessica on here to talk a little bit about how that's going to deploy and whether that's going to be kind of one region at a time in terms of their priority, or if they're all expected to do that. So we can dive in and answer that back a little bit. Similar to that, by the way, Marie, I see a question here from Shannon about, you know, kind of the expectations for synchronous learning versus last year. It was like my assignments are posted. Again, we're requiring as part of the reopen plan for every district, even those who go fully remote, that they have to tell us their daily and weekly schedule. So we want to see evidence that there's synchronous learning going on, so that students do have during the week times where they are absolutely connected with their teachers. There will definitely be some asynchronous stuff too. So assignments are given and students have time to work on it independently. But you're going to see a big uptick this year in synchronous learning. And that's got its own controversy, right? So some families say, I want a little bit of it, but I don't want my kids 6 hours a day sitting in front of a screen either. And we haven't seen too many of those models. It's mostly a couple hours a day on, and then they're working independently. And I would remind everyone, particularly if you haven't been in a classroom, you know, to see some of the most amazing sort of contemporary teaching. Teachers don't stand in front of kids and lecture for an hour anymore. It's very much guided learning. So it's true today that teachers will deliver content or learning or concepts and then give students the opportunity to work, either small groups or individually. It'll work similarly. No one should expect a teacher 6 hours a day in front of a kid just constantly on the go, but much more than we saw this spring for sure.
Yeah, and that's a good question that takes us kind of back up to the top here that says, you know, will the state be able to give some grace in terms of days and hours required given the full distance learning happening? It, you know, I'm hearing that some districts are talking, you know, about 6 hours, a day, and no one can even. Yes, they do that probably with Minecraft, right? But I don't think I don't think they want to do that, you know, with school. So you know, there's a lot of concern from parents, particularly those with elementary students, about how they're going to keep up with this and provide the necessary support to their students.
So the State Board of Education took a really important action a couple of weeks ago, and they've worked very hard and very quickly. They've redefined an instructional hour. So for purposes of meeting hours, for example, it has historically been the case that we're taking attendance, you know, once a day for kids in elementary, and we're taking it every class period in middle and high school. And so we always had a way to check in with kids, but attendance was always something that, for lack of a better term, was about teaching and learning where kids engaged. Enrollment counting, on the other hand, is a once a month thing that we do. And that doesn't change. We want districts to get their resources, and we do a once a month count basically to affirm that a student's been engaged. But by the State Board of Ed taking this definition much broader for instructional hours, it's face-to-face in person, it's face-to-face on screen, it's guided instruction, it's pre-recorded videos that students watch, it's students working very independently, even a whole day independently, where maybe on a particular day they don't have direct classes. All of that counts now for instructional hours. All of that counts. And so I think districts are feeling a lot better about meeting their 1,027 instructional hours because, again, it's replicating kind of what we do in a regular setting. Where it's a little nerve-wracking is some districts are saying, you know, we'd really double down right now on a couple of subjects if we could. So do we still have the mandates on particular minutes in PE, or do we still have specialists that we're going to do? Are kids still going to have library time or tech time or something else? That's mostly up to the districts. We are likely to give a waiver for the PE minutes in elementary school. That's something we can control here at OSPI. And so I think what we have to figure out is if we're going to do that, and that is equal to, you know, several hundred hours a year, or maybe it's 80 hours or 100 hours, are we waiving that across the top for districts, or is that filled up with other minutes that they're going to do? And we're not quite there yet, but the long answer, and way too long an answer, is districts have a lot of flexibility now on what an instructional hour is, and we're really confident they can meet those. So we don't expect to have to do a lot of waiver stuff, but we're prepared to at the end of the year. We can definitely still waive it to make sure districts get their resources. The last thing I want to say, though, is the 180 days. That's such an interesting thing because it really is not the driver for us. We want kids to get instructional time. So as some of you recall, we have districts already on a 4-day week. They've gotten a permanent waiver due to statute. They start as pilot programs, but they don't even get close to 180 days, but they meet the instructional hours because they add a half hour to their day or an hour to their day. So there's lots of different models that are being created for days, but they all have to meet the instructional hour timeline. And so these things kind of work in combination, and tough remotely right now, but you're going to see a level of engagement that was very different than this spring, and it'll make a lot of people quite pleased, and it'll have a lot of people saying, hey, if it's not 6 hours every single day, it's not the same as it was. It will not be 6 hours on screen time every day. I can assure you of that.
Yeah. So, and kind of a follow-up to that is, so if families can't get their student logged into synchronous learning, is their student going to be considered truant? And I know there is some concern I'm hearing about attendance and how will attendance actually be done at the district level, and, you know.
Yeah, so we're going to issue some rules on that right now. It's at the code revisor's office. We want to make sure that everyone knows that we are in fact taking attendance, but we want to clarify what it means to be attentive and in attendance remotely, because again, it can be face-to-face like we are right now, or it can be a student checking in on Wednesdays when they don't have classes but an assignment's due. And so there'll be lots of language around that. And then there's a really important part in there where we basically say, listen, this is not going to be used for truancy boards and all of the punitive stuff that is ripe for revision anyways, by the way, but we're not going to do any of that in the fall because we know that districts are just getting this thing cranked up and we need to understand their experience. And so there's going to be a bit of a grace period here on what the implications are for a student who can't connect, but we still expect districts to take attendance daily.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So Lacy, I'm going to ask you to look at the kind of the question comment by John Gartner, and then I'm going to ask Chris a couple of questions, and then maybe we can, that's my little timer, come back to that particular piece. So Chris, just a couple of quick things. So what guidance are you issuing around food and homework distribution for this fall?
We expect our districts to deliver or provide an opportunity for families to pick up food. We have a full expectation that any family eligible for free and reduced price lunch will continue to access their food. We have waivers so they can do that in bulk, maybe once a week. They pick up food for the week or whatever districts kind of work out. We've gotten all the flexibility that we need with one exception. This last spring, it was so sudden and so quick that what we were able to do is say any family who thinks they need resources and food, come in and you can get it. We are back to a verification process. So when we hand that bag of food to a family, a parent or a child, we just need to make sure that we know that's an eligible student in the free and reduced price program. That's a waiver we didn't get for this next go around from the feds. But basically our expectation is we are in fact feeding kids who really needed it, such a high priority for myself, the governor, and others. Again, the transportation issue is if they're bringing in students and back, great. If they cannot get students connected, their transportation systems will be available for that. There's been a tough moment here on transportation where our old formulas based it on really ridership from the prior year. We're going to make a pretty affirmative statement here in the next 48, 72 hours that says we are paying districts all of their money for transportation, certainly within our authority, which is September to January. And we've worked with legislators, and they are telling us, like, you know, we're going to look at this come January. They know that there's a statute change they have to make to allow us to keep paying after that, because normally we would use ridership counts in the fall to pay for the spring. But imagine a school district that's going remote right now. They don't have ridership counts. And then suddenly they're able to open in January, February to second semester. And they turn to us and say, we need our transportation money. And we say, well, it's based on your fall counts, and you didn't have any counts. And so it's not going to work. We're going to need to guarantee districts get their resources. I can only guarantee it for 5 months based on the law, but we've got legislators who understand that they got to get into town and take an early action. So I'm getting to transpo because I think it was one of the questions, but it sort of answers this one, which is, in the meantime, districts have their money and they have their staff and they have their teams, and they might be running homework packets around. They might still be putting Wi-Fi hotspots on buses and going in some communities. There'll be a little bit of creativity going on all over the state around transportation.
Great. Okay. And just quickly, maybe what kind of guidance are you offering around social emotional learning of our students? Is there guidance that encourages district? I know there's the extracurricular, if you're in moderate or high, it says, you know, please don't do it, but what can people do around online, maybe school clubs, ASBs, you know, things to make sure that kids are socializing and getting that social aspect of the school that they're not going to get in an you know, if they were all remote?
Yeah, so a couple things on this. We clearly have an expectation that this needs to replicate as much as possible, you know, the better remote learning models, which means there are still students meeting and engaging in clubs and activities. There's still lots that can go on. As you said, depending on your phase, there can be some in-person stuff at the school. When I also think about social emotional learning, I think about the formality of screeners. So we know there are kids who are struggling remotely. There are some who are thriving, by the way. It's not universal to say one way or the other. We do have an expectation that all districts have a screener, both an academic screener and an SEL approach, so that as they welcome students either virtually or face-to-face this fall, that they do quite a bit of evaluation of student needs to try to figure out who needs additional supports. And again, this is tough because districts would normally be doing this pretty informally in classrooms. Teachers are really good about doing that informal assessment of kids and where they are, right? We've all, those of us with students, we send them in like the first couple of days, they're evaluating what they learned and what they remember from last year. And that happens academically and it happens social emotionally. And normally it's very invisible to families, but now districts are going to have to figure out a way to do that more formally, remotely. And some lends itself really easily and others are really, really tough to do.
Okay, I'm going to let you think about one while we go to Lacy. So there are a couple of questions about learning pods in the Q&A. Chris, if you could take a look at those and then be prepared to talk with us a little bit about what your thoughts are. And then maybe a final from you as a wrap up would be, what could Washington State PTA, what should we be doing now? What could we be doing to set our students up for success? And Lacy, let's go to you for that question from John.
Yes, and I'd love to also provide a little bit on the pods piece as well, if I understand.
Awesome.
We've gotten a
Great.
couple of questions about this as well. So the question is about hybrid learning and specifically 6 feet of distance. I would say, given what we know about COVID and our transmission rates in Washington State, we would like to keep our recommendation, and we plan to keep our recommendation solidly at 6 feet of distance until we get much lower rates and have some success in reopening. And you know, the example that I give is that Denmark, when they reopened, they were at 2 meters, 6 feet basically. And after they were open for a period of time and did not have outbreaks or increase in cases more broadly, they relaxed their distance requirement to 3 feet. We are totally open to doing that. We are totally open to doing that if we see that it works in other states that reopen But right now, based on the available science and the majority of recommendations from national organizations, we're going to stay at 6 feet for the time being on the physical distancing. On the pods, and I think these are when families get together, groups of households, to sort of share the burden of childcare slash helping your kids learn online, right? Is that what the question is about, those types of pods? Yeah, we've received a few questions about these. So one, and I completely empathize, I am a full-time working parent. I have a school-age child. He is in elementary school, and remote learning is really hard for him. So we definitely think if these are done very carefully, that they can certainly help with the stress, the household stress, and give children some social interaction. We encourage you to keep them very small. And so thinking about the Safe Start recommendation, which says if you are in phase 2, you are to congregate or gather with no more than 5 people outside your household per week. And if you're in phase 3, that number is 10. So, you know, like going with one other family is probably okay. And we also encourage you to look at the school health and safety guidance and use the majority of it. Certainly people indoors need to be wearing masks. You need to have good airflow in your house, as much distance as you can provide your young people, and whoever the host is going to have to be diligent on cleaning those frequently touched surfaces, etc. And of course, and this is anything in life right now, people who are sick need to stay home.
Yeah, I'll bring the education angle. Lacy is just amazing and expert at the health side of this thing. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense to avoid classroom settings if folks are going to spread COVID through smaller networks. And so it's so important that all those health protection factors are in place in those. What we've said, of course, is this is a remarkable time and it is unlike anything else. And so people should not norm the future based on the current event. That said, there are parents who have to figure things out. They are working families. Maybe there are 1 or 2 in the family who are working outside the home, and they don't have that option of being there with their children. So we understand it. That is a private choice that they make. Now, let me get super technical so everyone understands the money flow. For many of these, what it means is they still very much want to be connected to their school district, and the teaching and learning is going to really be derived from the school and the teacher. But they're trying to get into pods or get in environments where they can support each other from really a childcare and a safety standpoint so parents can work. But the district's still really doing the bulk of the teaching and learning. The district would retain the resources, and that's just a matter of where the student is, and that's really a family's choice. We have scenarios where families are going to unenroll their student from a district, and they want to go into this kind of pod environment. And in that case, the district will lose its funding. It will lose its enrollment because the family is unenrolled. And in almost every community, that means the family is really on its own. It's more of a homeschool model, or they're going to put their kid in a private school setting, which is always an option that they have if there are private schools open and available in their community. But it's that middle one that's, I think, tough for people. On one hand, if you don't stay connected to the school, you're not getting formal assignments, pacing guides, assessments, and all of that. And so that really looks a lot like homeschool, which is a really viable option in our state. And there are some supports that can come with that. But I'd really caution people around this in the short term. I think the best thing if folks are looking for that sort of connection is to stay connected to your district. Then you have a teacher who's evaluating learning, someone you can check in with, and you're really doing this for purposes of trying to manage working parents. My opinion long-term, I'll just share with you, is there's been a long history of these in the United States. They tend to create resegregation. It often is the case that families who can most afford it and have resources are the ones who create these, and other families may not have that choice. And so I would ask everyone to be very careful about this. And if you're thinking about being in a pod, ask yourself who's in that with you. And what opportunities do you have, and what opportunities do other families have? And think about the long-term implications of this. It seems pretty easy to say, I'm going to pull my kid out now and then I'll just put them back in next year. But a school district that loses that resource maybe making a personnel decision right away to address the fact that they have less money and may not have the opportunity to rehire that person next year. So just want everyone to make the best choice for their family, of course, but keep the larger system in mind. And the more connected they are with their districts, the better the transition back to in-person learning.
Thank you both on that. And then Chris, I know we're a little bit over, but just thoughts about what Washington State PTA could be doing, should be doing, working with their districts, working with, clearly we're in the midst of our legislative proposal season, so we're developing ours, but thoughts you might have.
Well, I always think of it in two layers, the individual family. Y'all just amazing folks, and the fact that you're involved in PTA, and I've met so many of you, it's a level of engagement that's quite inspiring, and you got to keep that going, which means you do need to be talking to your district right now. What's our opening plan? What are the supports available? If my student has an IEP, how will I know it's going to get served well? And if not, what's the plan to do differently? So there's always a personal responsibility around the micro work of the district and family relationship. From an organizational standpoint, kind of the second layer from PTA is obviously being super active with the legislature. To put this moment in context, it is such a financial shock around the country and around the world, and hopefully more stimulus money comes to ease that. But what we ought not do is make permanent damaging decisions to public education, because for 6 months or a year and a half, we're in this unprecedented moment. That's what we want to avoid, and we would want hopefully PTA to really be an advocate for sustainable public education. We've all built a much better system over the last 3 or 4 years, and let's not lose that at all because of the moment when there's clearly going to be another side to this thing, and we're going to need to be really strong when we come out of it. So state level advocacy and one-to-one family school district work, which you all are really good at.
Thank you. And Lacy, thoughts for parents as we enter this home stretch before school opens?
Well, one, please, hang in there. We know this is a really long and hard journey that we're all on together. None of us imagined or ever wished to be here, I don't think. Two, we very much want to get to the place where all of the kids in Washington State are getting some level of in-person learning, and getting there is not changing DOH guidance or lobbying policymakers at the state or local level. It's really all of us as adults making decisions about where we spend our time, and practicing shorter, safer, and fewer in-person interactions, and wearing masks, and sort of limiting our gatherings. Those are the things we're going to have to do if we want to get our kids back in school.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, thank you both. Thank you again to Maddy Thompson from the Governor's Office for joining us today. We really appreciate this time. We know you are very, very busy, and so thank you for taking time out of your day, and we'll work to set something up again, hopefully maybe in another 6 weeks when school will be underway and we've got more information to share about how things are going. So you both stay well too, and thank you. Everyone have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.